Are we on air? Here we go. Hello. Welcome to the XMod Pro April user group meeting. Hi, everyone. Currently with us, we have Kelly Four, the president of DNNDev.com, Patrick Ryan of Reflect Media Group, and Roy Clark of Point Creative. I'm Melinda Ford, and I'm vice president of DNNDev.com. Wanted to welcome you all, and I'm looking at our Google Plus Hangout page, and I see here that you should be able to put in Q&A questions. So during the presentations today, if you put those in, you can click on the screen on the upper right, and it's where it says Q&A. Enter a question, and the presenters should be able to answer those during their talk. I will also be posting a link to this so that you can join. Let's see if it works for me. Well, I'll be posting a link after I introduce everyone so that you can join, those of you that want to participate in the presentation itself, as long as you just mute your microphones. That would be great. Also, last month we had a couple of great presentations, and one of the presentations, Kelly Ford had mentioned that he would be providing a demo for that AJAX search sort, and that is now available on our website at DNNDev.com /clients/downloads. So you can go there and log in under an active user, and you can download that demonstration. So today, excited to have our two speakers today be talking about some great things with XMod Pro. And again, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to there, and I'll answer those. Kelly Ford's going to be talking about using feeds to update records with AJAX. And Patrick is actually going to be speaking about part 2 of his demonstration on how to create a parent-child category listing. So with that, I'd like to welcome you all again to our April XMod Pro user group meeting, and hope that some of you can join us in the presentation section. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Kelly Ford. Kelly?
Thanks, Melinda. I am happy to be here for another April. I've got some feedback in my headphones. There we go. Better. So hopefully you can still hear me. This week, this month, I'm going to be talking a little bit about we cover feeds a lot because feeds are really helpful and flexible. And you can do a lot with them. Most of the time people use feeds to just retrieve data or maybe create an RSS feed or something like that. But generally it's a one-way activity. Today we're going to take a bit of a different approach on it. We're going to use feeds in a way that they're not normally, well, they weren't originally designed to be used for. We're going to use them to update records in your database so that you can have a nice AJAX button that you can click on to make a change in the database and have that automatically reflected in the user interface. And it's kind of common way of approaching things these days, so I wanted to show it to you so you get a good handle on how to create these. So without further ado, before I start, I do want to invite, like Melinda said, I want to invite anybody who's watching now to go ahead and join us. Melinda's going to try to paste a link specifically for you to join us into the page for the user group meeting. So be on the lookout for that if you want to join us. Just when you join us, just have your mic muted. That way we won't be interrupting any speakers, and then of course you'll be able to ask questions by turning your mic on later on. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? Okay, I'm going to share my screen to give you a look at what the end product is of our work for today, and then we're going to try to step through and see if we can build it from scratch. So let me move over. I need not that screen. I need, where's my Windows screen? Okay. Hangouts, not that one. And that is not the one that I need. Sorry guys, this is usually a lot easier. Just going to share the entire screen, which is probably not so good for people with smaller screens. Let me maximize this as much as possible. What's this? No, that's not what I wanted. Leave me alone. Stop with the magnifying glass windows. Gee, this is really bad. How do I get out of that? There we go. Let's just zoom. Okay, a little. Does it look good? All right. Well, we'll do that. So hopefully you can see, okay, this is what we're going to do. We just have a list of what I call applications, and this is just made up data really, but we have a title for an application. We'll just present this as authors who are applying to have their book published. So they submit the title of their book, who they are, and then over here you can see we have a workflow on the right. We have whether or not it's been approved and the date that it's been approved on. And I'm still having problems with my, there we go. I think that'll do it. Okay. All right, much better. So what we're going to be focusing on are these last two columns here. And you can see I have a nice little hover effect over the button. It kind of comes into focus or highlights when you hover over it, and it has an X in it. That means it's not approved right now, but if we click on it, it spins as it's working. And hopefully I might have to start up my application again.
I'd like to welcome
There
Bill.
it is. Huh?
I'd like to welcome Bill.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Bill, welcome. So we'll continue on. You notice that it's now marked as approval or as approved, and it gives you the date that it was approved on. So that's what we're going to be working to accomplish, and we're going to do this. There was no post back here. We're going to be doing this all with AJAX and feeds and a little help from our database as well. So let's get to it. The first thing we want to do is focus on our database. And again, like last month, although this month I'll have it out much quicker, like last month, I will give you the code for this later on, but I want to take a look at the table we have. This is just something I created in the DNN table. It is called UG Applications, and it's pretty straightforward. Each record has an ID, and an integer, an identity field called application ID. Then there's the title, which is in varchar 80, and then a summary, which goes up to 400 characters. The date that the record was submitted on, the date, or whether or not it was approved, when it was approved, and who approved it, and then the last modified date. So nothing earth-shattering here, just kind of a straight table with basic fields in it. And what we're going to be working on is updating the is approved field and the approved on field. We'll also add some other stuff in the stored procedure that does this, but those are the primary columns that we're going to be focusing on. So let's take a look at the one stored procedure that we are going to be creating or working with, and that is here. This is called SP_UG update _ application approval. And this is also fairly straightforward, but there's some things I want to point out. First of all, we're going to be passing in the application ID for the application that we want to update. Additionally, we want to pass in the user ID so we know who modified the record. And then we want to pass in whether or not the record was approved or not. So we can actually turn the approval off if we want to. First thing, in the first section here is a little bit of error checking, and we're going to use this in conjunction with our jQuery code, and we're going to also with our feed, and we're going to be passing some extra data back to the client side, depending on what the server here decides. So, for instance, it is looking to see if the application ID actually exists, first of all, and so it's just basically all it's doing is counting the number of records that have that particular application ID that was passed in, which is right here. Obviously, we want just one to be there. If it's 0 or really some other number, then that's an invalid ID. So we don't want to try to update that record. Second, we also want to make sure that the user exists. So we're doing the same thing here in these two lines. We're just counting the user ID where user ID equals @user ID. So we want to make sure that the user ID exists. And again, just like the number of apps, the number of users should be 1. If it's 0, then we don't want to mess with it because the user doesn't exist. And it could be that someone is trying to trick the system. So first, we're going to start off checking the number of application records. And if it's 0, we know that that application record doesn't actually exist. So we're going to do a custom select here. Basically, we're just going to return a column called error, ERR here. And we're going to set on, which means on. It's a bit field. It could be true or on. And then in the second column, we're going to pass this string back, whatever our error message is. In this case, we're saying no application was found with that ID. And we're going to call that column message. And our client side has been set up to be looking for these two columns. And if they're not there, then everything's good. But if they are there, it's going to take special action based on that. Next, we do a second if block here where we're checking for the user, make sure that the user is actually in existence. So we do the same thing. If the number of users is 0, we say, okay, the error is true. I pass in 1 as the error column, and we just give a message, invalid user, we'll say, and we'll pass that as the message column. Those are just for errors, and the client side has been coded to handle those. However, if we don't have an error, and presumably we won't, we go ahead and handle the work. And that's pretty straightforward. We're saying, okay, well, if you're passing in the number 1, if you're passing in true for approved, if you want to approve this record, then we're just going to do an update statement here. We're going to update UG applications and set the approved value to whatever you passed in for add approved, which is going to be 1 because we just checked for it here. Then we're also going to set the user ID to whoever approved it is going to be the user, and then we're going to say it got approved on and modified on get UTC date. I'm doing that primarily because that's most applications that have to have global audiences are going to deal with UTC date. So I just kind of wanted to show you that function. There's also what we usually use is get date, and that will get the current date and time of the server, the database server. But UTC date will get the actual UTC value of the current time. So that's all we're doing here, and we're just saying update those values wherever the application ID is, whatever you passed in. Now, if approved is not true, if it is false, or if we pass in 0, then we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to say is approved equals add approved, which in this case is going to be 0. So we're saying approved is false. And we're also going to remove the approved by and approved on values. We're just going to set them to null because that application is no longer approved. And again, we're setting the modified date to get UTC date. And then finally, we're going to return the full application record. And this is important, and it happens a lot in REST-based applications. Whenever you make a modification to a record, if you add a record or if you update a record, typically you'll see that be returned, the whole record be returned. That way the client can do something with it. It can update the user interface if it needs to, or sometimes it will ignore it, but most of the time it will use it to update the interface. And that's what we're going to do in our client-side application. Again, this code will be part of the package that you can download within, let's say within the week, hopefully by tomorrow. The second part of what we need to make this work is the feed. That's really the part that ties the database in to the client. So let's take a look at that now. And that is over here. Try that again. Just maximize. Okay. So this is the feed that we'll be dealing with. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to bother to work through it. But the key thing here is we're creating a JSON feed, and we've set up our client to expect a JSON object back. And that allows us to easily deal with errors and error codes and updated values for a particular record and update our client that way. So I've chosen to use a JSON feed. And all we're doing here was in our list data source, we are just executing that stored procedure that I just showed you. And because we want to use it this way without having to use the exec command, we're going to set command type to stored procedure. And then we'll pass in each of our parameters. Now here we're passing in, the name is going to be the parameter name that the database is expecting. The value for the parameter, though, is going to be what gets passed in from the client. And that was weird. There we go. So the value is going to be a form variable because we're going to post it back to the server. And remember, we use our single quotes to delimit our value when we're using XMod Pro controls. So we're putting in the form token and passing in this is going to be the name of the parameter that we pass in to the server. We want to set the data type to N32 to further help protect against cross-site or SQL injection attacks. The next parameter, of course, is user ID, and we're doing something similar, but we're using the user ID token from XMod Pro. And then finally, we are passing in a parameter called approved, and for that, we're passing in the form parameter value approved, and that is a data type of Boolean. So pretty clear-cut and pretty tight implementation here. There isn't really a lot of areas where anybody can do any SQL injection because everything has a specific data type, no string data types. Okay, now the fun happens when we deal with the templates. So let's do that. That's where everything comes together. So let's switch back here. And I think I'm wondering, do we want to do this from scratch? How much time do we have? About 10 minutes? Probably not. Let's go ahead and just look at the code and that I already have created, and we'll step through it. Okay, a couple of things right off the top, just to help with, and you'll see that I'll do this for a lot of the examples that we deal with from here on out. I'm just going to use Bootstrap to help with layout and buttons and just make things easier so you don't have to futz around too much with doing complicated layouts. So we're using Bootstrap to do our styling for us, and to make it easier on you, I am using the CDN version of Bootstrap. This happens to be the most recent version at the time of this video. And I also am using the CDN version of Font Awesome because I think their fonts are actually awesome, and I love to use them. So you feel free to use whatever styling you want and whatever iconography you want. That's really up to you, but this should make it pretty easy to get up and going. And then finally, I do have, and I usually have, a custom style sheet that I have set up in a folder in my local DNNDev or my local DNN development site, and that's just coming from the root. It is, I call it user group, and then I have a 2015 for the year directory, and then one for the month that we're having our user group, and then CSS folder, and then our style CSS file. And you can see that that is not all that special, just a couple of rules here this time around, and we're just changing colors basically on hover for specific using some of the Font Awesome class names that we have built into the template. So nothing extraordinary there, not a lot of animations or any other stuff, just basic coloring for us. Okay, now the template, we have AJAX set to false because we're going to do our own AJAX. And use paging is irrelevant because we're not interested in paging at this stage, but we have it set to true so you can page through the results. And our list data source is straightforward, just a standard select where we're returning all of the columns in the table. You don't have to do that because we're not actually using all of the columns, but they're there. And it's just returning it from UG applications table. Next, I've set up an actual HTML table, and I've given it an ID of applications table and a class of table. Setting this class will allow Bootstrap to style it for us. It's a pretty basic styling, but it works. And then finally, here in the head section, I have the T head and a list of all the columns here for those who are fairly new to HTML. Those will be the column headings. And then the item template is where we do our data work, and you can see there are a few tokens here. One thing I like to do, especially when I'm dealing with grids or columns, I will take the primary key from the particular record, and in each row I will set a data attribute. This is an HTML5 attribute, data dash whatever. In this case I call it data dash ID, and I just set it to, and this doesn't actually have to be single quotes, it could be double quotes. I set it to the ID, and that way whenever I get in and look at that particular row, I know where to get the ID for that record that it's displaying. It just makes it easier to get at that information. Next, I have the column for the actual application ID. We're going to be displaying that to the user, as well as the title and the summary. And then this is the part where we display either the button to approve the record or to not approve the record. And so I'm using an XMod select tag here. And for that, I'm just doing a comparison of a Boolean, because that's what our column is. So the value we're comparing is the isApproved column, and we want to make sure that it is equal to the expression, which is true. So if the isApproved column is true, it's going to render out what's between the case tag, the opening and closing case tag, and that happens to be this span tag here. And this is really simple. It looks a little bit more complex because we've added some Bootstrap and Font Awesome class names to it, but it's really straightforward. Basically, the button class will allow this span tag to function like a button. So it can hover, it can change things on hover. It'll hover or change the pointer from an arrow to it'll change the cursor from an arrow to a pointer. The FA and FA check circle 0 or O will allow us to have, tells Font Awesome that this is something that should style, and it should use the circle or the check mark in a circle, in an open circle icon for that. We're also coloring it the color of success, which in America at least is green for the dollar, and so that's what the style is for Bootstrap. And then finally, the Font Awesome FA-2X just means we're having basically a 2 times the size icon there. We're just making it a little bit larger for you. And just like I did for the table row, this isn't strictly necessary, but a lot of times this is the way you want to go about it. I put a data-ID on the button that gets clicked. That way I can just refer to that value without having to search through the rest of the HTML to find the application ID. So I don't have to step from this button up to the table row in order to get the ID. I can just get it straight from the button. Okay, now if it's not approved, then we want to display that gray X in a circle. So that's what we're doing here. We just got another span tag, styling it as a button, but this time we're using the times or the X in a circle, and we're also making that fairly large and setting the data ID to the application ID. And then finally, the last column is the date that the record was actually approved. Of course, if it hasn't been approved, or if the approval date has been removed, that's going to be passing null back to our client. So we'll want to deal with that, and just we don't want to try to format that as a date. We'll clear it out, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. One other thing that I like to use, and you may or may not be aware of it, front-end developers have long been using this particular library, and I highly recommend it. I use it in all of my projects that have to deal with dates. It's so much easier than dealing with, most of the time, it's so much easier than dealing with the JavaScript date object. And that's moment.js, and this is the CDN reference to it, but you can find it at momentjs.com, and you'll find that it's really an awesome library. It makes life a lot easier when you're dealing with JavaScript, so I would recommend you check that out. Now, the meat of everything that happens, it's an AJAX application, so everything's going to be happening in JavaScript, and primarily with the help of jQuery. So we have our friendly XMod jQuery ready tag, so we know this is going to execute only after the page is fully loaded and the DOM has been loaded into the browser. So we're just setting up a variable here called feedBase. That means that will allow us, if we have multiple AJAX calls through in our code, we only have to deal with typing this out once, and then we'll pass in the rest of the values as part of our call, like the feed name, and I'll show you that here in a second. Next, this is all we have to do really is the event handler. We are handling the click event of any class, any element that has a class of btn. In our case, it is just those buttons that have that .btn class. So we're only handling clicks for those buttons. Obviously, if you have a more complex HTML scenario, you might need to be a bit more specific with your selector here, but that will handle this particular example quite well. And what we're doing is if you're not familiar with jQuery, whenever someone clicks on the button, jQuery will pass in this, the object this will be the element that was clicked on. And so what we're doing here in this first line is we're taking this and we're transforming it with the $. We're making it a jQuery object that we can deal with and take advantage of all the jQuery methods on it. So I like to assign a $sign variable name, so $sign btn for button. That way I always know that this is a jQuery object. And that's just something I do. You're welcome to do that if you'd like, or not. Just ignore it if you want. Next line, we're actually going and getting the application ID. And to do that, because everything is stored as text in your HTML, we need to convert this so that it gets handled properly on the server. We want to convert this to an integer. And this is the way you do it in JavaScript. We're basically grabbing the data-id value. You remember on the button here, the data-id here. That's the value we're getting. And this is the way you do it in jQuery. It's very simple. Whenever you do data-attributes, it makes it easy. You just type in .data, and then you put what comes after the dash here in parentheses. So this is really can be read as data-id. So it's getting the value there. It's converting into a base 10 number, just kind of standard that you need to work with when you're converting to an integer or any other regular number mostly. So that'll get us the app ID as an actual integer. The next line is assigning a 1 or a 0 to the approve variable based on whether or not the record's been approved. And the way we're doing that is we're just checking the class name. And sometimes these styling classes can be very effective for determining what the value is of, or the state of your user interface, and that can be used in your conditionals like we're doing here. So we're saying if the button that we got, if it has a class of fa-times-circle-o, if it has the x in the circle, then we want to say that the approved value is going to be true, because whenever you have and let me close out of this for a second. So whenever you have this x here, we know that this particular record isn't approved. So when someone clicks on that button, they want to approve that record. So even though right now it says it's not approved, we want to pass in the value approve to the database, and so that's what we're doing there. That's why it seems opposite of the way that you would normally think about it, but that's the reasoning behind it. So if it has an fa-times-circle-o, then we know that we want to pass in 1 for the approval value. We're saying, hey, approve the record. If it doesn't have that class in it, then we know it's the other one, and so we're going to pass in false. That means that the person's clicked on an approved record and they want to unapprove that record. So we'll pass in 0 in that case. Now this is a fun little thing you can do, and you saw it there in the beginning. In most cases when you're working locally, it's not going to be, you'll never notice it, but this is kind of a nice way to do your progress bar. You could do a standard progress bar or lots of other ways to do it, but a very simple thing if you're using Font Awesome is our button is that icon, so we can simply add this class name of fa-spin, and it'll start spinning around. And if we want it to stop spinning, then we just remove that class from that object. So that's what's going to happen, is whenever they click on the button, it's going to start spinning, and that'll work as the progress bar. You just have to make sure you remove that class in all cases, not only on success but also on failure. So actually we don't need this line here. Okay, so now we actually make our AJAX call, and for that we are setting the URL that we want to call to the feed base that we already established earlier. We're going to make a form post to the server, and we expect the data type coming back from the server to be JSON. This is not often needed because jQuery will infer it, but it's best to be explicit. If you're using XMod Pro's JsonFeed, it automatically sets the MIME type or the content type for the return value to JSON. So jQuery will pick that up, but it's always best practice just to specify that data type. Finally, we're going to pass in the data, which would be the parameters that we talked about in the feed. We're going to pass that in to the server. And if you've ever looked at the URL for accessing a feed, you'll know that part of that URL always has a PID, which is your portal ID, and it also has an XFD parameter, and that's the name of your feed. So that's what we're doing here. We're just passing in our portal ID, which is 0, and we're passing in the name of the feed that we want to execute, and that happens to be user group 2015-4 update approval. The real data that we're sending in is application ID, and that's that app ID that we generated in the variable above, and same for approved. We're sending in either the 1 or the 0 based on what the value we determined up here in the approved variable assignment. Now you'll notice that we're not passing in user ID. If you recall, the feed had a user ID parameter and the stored procedure required it. So in this case, we are not passing it from the client. That would make it a lot easier to spoof. So we're not going to do that. We assign that, as you saw in the feed, we're using XMod Pro's user:id token to get it from the context. So that adds a lot of kind of an additional layer of security, because that means that the request to that feed, even though it's publicly available, anybody can call it. It's just a URL. But when that is called, it has to have a DNN context associated with it, and the user has to be registered in order to have an ID. So all of that happens on the server. It doesn't happen on the client. It's just another layer of security, and also a best practice whenever you can use it to approach it that way. So finally, when we get a success back from a success, when the server sends us back something other than an error, that will come in to the success function, which we're defining here, and we're saying send the results as the results variable. And as you recall, the feeds in XMod Pro, the JSON feed will actually send you back an array of JSON objects. So this actually is an array, and we're going to have to pull our object. Even though we're only getting one record, we're going to have to pull that out of the array. But first, we want to make sure that we remove the spin class. So in the event that it is spinning on the user, we want to stop it from spinning. We don't want it to spin to infinity. So that's just that bit, a bit of house cleaning. Also, we're checking, making sure the server actually returned something. If it didn't, then we're just going to get out of here and not do anything. But if it did return something, we know it's an array, so we're going to get the first element in the array. That is the item with an index of 0. So our result, our actual JSON object, is going to be the variable result here. First thing we do is we check result. We're going to see if error exists, and this is the way you can check. The nice thing is that in our stored procedure, we don't have to return the column error, although we did, as part of our select command whenever we actually successfully update something. This check here will just ignore it if it wasn't there, and it'll move on. But it says if error does exist, then it's just going to pop up an alert with whatever the error message was that we sent back. And then it's going to call a function called reload record, which we'll get to in just a second. But we also want to make sure that we handle any kind of error state as part of the AJAX call. And all we're going to do here, we're not even going to bother to alert the user. You can do that in your own time as your own exercise. All we're going to do here is make sure that we get that FA spin class off of the button so it doesn't keep spinning forever and ever. Just some housekeeping. Finally, all the work really happens here in the reload record. You notice we are passed in the actual record that was returned from the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the row that contains the ID of the record that was passed to us. And you'll notice I had put that data ID in the row. So I'm just looking for a table row that has an attribute, data-id, of whatever the application ID is of the record that was passed in. So I have the row, and then I go and I find the button. So from the row itself, I go and I look for the first item that has a .btn class, and that's going to be our button in the row. Now I have those objects stored and cached. It makes it a lot easier to deal with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check and see if the record was actually approved. So if it is now approved, remember we're getting passed back the record after it has been modified. So now we're dealing with actual states of the record, not the intent of the user. So if it came back and the record is approved, then we want to remove the class that has the X in it, the icon that has the X in it, and we want to add the class that turns it into this check mark inside of the circle. And we also want to set the color of it to green so everybody knows that it's a success and it'll stand out better in the user interface. However, if record is not approved, then we're going to remove the check inside of the circle and the text success, because remember we're coming from a success state most likely. And then we're going to add the hey, it's not approved icon here. And last but not least, I wanted to show you a little bit about moment. This is where we go to format the date that the record was approved on. So this is very a nice way to prove it. Remember, we store this as UTC date, so I'm just setting up a variable called UTC date, and I'm creating a moment object, and I'm passing in the value that was passed into us as part of the record, so the date that the record was approved. And then I'm going to find the table cell, which in this case happens to be the 5th table cell, or EQ4, and I'm setting the text to a formatted version of that date, which is just simply month, day, day, year, along with the hours, minutes, and AM, PM. And that's the US version of it. You can always change that formatting, and Moment makes it very easy to do that to whatever you need. However, if there is no approved on, if it's null, if it has been wiped out on the database, then this is going to return false, and we'll drop down to the else clause, and we're just going to clear out whatever may have been there in the first place. So we're going to make it blank, and that is how you do it. And this is the result. We can we'll just do this Carrie's War by Nina Bodden, and we'll click on it, and it is spinning, and now it's off. You can actually kind of see it a little bit. It looks like Hangouts is slowing things down just enough for you to see it spin most of the time. And then we can turn those back on, and you can see like this 637.27 was the approval for Carrie's War. If we unapprove it and then we approve it again, you'll see it's 637.20 or 36. So the date has actually changed. And there you have it. We'll have code for you hopefully within a day. I'll work on it probably tomorrow and try to get it up and give you a link just like I did with this other one, although much more quickly this time around. And that's it. Are there any questions? I'm assuming not, so I will stop sharing my screen. And there we go. I will now give up the floor to, wow, I'd like to see everybody involved here. Welcome. I finally get to see you guys on kind of camera. If you guys have any questions, feel free to pop up now, turn your mic on if you have one, or type something into the Q&A screen. Nope? Okay, good. Well, then we'll move on to Patrick. Patrick, what do you have for us today? I hear I've been waiting for over a month for part 2. Hope you have something special.
Hey, Kelly. I do. I think so. And that is if I don't bomb again like last month. But
I don't remember anything about that.
Oh.
As far as I recall, it was beautiful, spot on.
That's awesome. Give me just 1 second, guys. I'm going to share my screen. And
all right.
Let me zoom in just a little bit. How's that look?
To me, it looks good.
Great.
Good for everybody else?
Looks good.
Okay, so if any of you did not see the last user group or just need a reminder, what I basically did here was, and the goal of this is, how do we create a parent-child category relationship and display those within a template and group those in order. So we've got like parent A here, and then we've got child A, and then child A2, and then there's test there, parent B, and then test 3. Pardon the category names, they're a little goofy, but just look at the structure here. And just a reminder, if you did not see the previous one here, this is not actually in the database, this little hyphen here. And how I'm actually controlling that is within my actual select command. So actually that's a little bit too zoomed in. I'm going to have to meet in the middle here, guys. All right. So what I've got here is a table that just holds categories, and you can see that I've got an outer select here and then some inner queries. And within the inner queries, the first one I'm selecting the parents, and then I'm union all to select the children as well. And there's where the little hyphen comes into play here. So where is it? Okay, here we go. So we've got single quote, space, hyphen, single quote, plus category name as category name. And then just displaying them in a basic template. All right, so that's all well and good and great. Now, the end goal is, how can we transform this? And basically, this is a list box right here, a multi-select list box. And how can we turn this list box into a category checkbox tree, to where you see the parent categories? And really, I can just show you, because I've got, this is from Discover XMod Pro, and this is the classifieds application at its most recent stage. And down here at the bottom, you can see some categories, and you'll see that if I select if I can click it, select a parent, children show, or uncheck it, they disappear, and so on. And that syncs with the list box and is certainly much more user-friendly compared to just a regular standard list box. So how do we do that? Well, I've got a test form here with nothing on it but a list box. And all I did was I took my select command from my template here, and I dropped that inside of a controlled data source. So here's my form so far. I've got an empty script block that's going to have some styles in a moment, an empty submit command, and a controlled data source with the ID of CDS categories. And then I've got the same query from my template inside of that controlled data source. And then down here a little bit below, we've got a list box with the ID of categories. We are using a controlled data source, so you've got data source ID. The text field is a category name, the value field the category ID, append data bound items true, and selection mode is multiple. So that's what we're looking at, and I'm going to see how much of this I can get done. Looks like we've got a little bit more than 15 minutes remaining. So all this is going to be done with JavaScript. So what I'm going to do first is just open up my form, and before I do anything else, I'm going to add what's called a client name to the opening add form tag, and I'll just call it cat for categories, meow. So the client name, if you tinkered around with ASP.NET for any time, you'll see that even though I gave this an ID of categories, how it actually renders to the client is quite a bit different. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and show you. So if I right-click over this list box, choose Inspect Element, and I know this is a little hard to see down here, but you can certainly try this on your own. Here's the actual ID, and that's pretty ugly and hard to deal with on the client. So XMod Pro comes with a really handy little feature called Client Name, and what that enables us to do is tap into our form controls by their ID without having to remember or write down that long string of ASP.NET beauty. Note the sarcasm. All right, so what I'll do here is directly underneath my list box, I'm actually going to create a UL with an ID of categories container, and I'm not going to put anything in it whatsoever. So it's just an empty unordered list HTML element, and below that I can use jQuery ready, but I'm actually going to use, to start out, I'm going to use the script tag, and I want the color syntax highlighting to help us out a little bit. And what the jQuery ready tag would do is this right here. So we got document ready function. So we know that anything inside of here is going to execute when the document is ready, when the DOM is loaded into the browser. And give me just 1 second here. Pull out my notes. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to tap into this list box right here. And how do we do that? We create a variable. I'll just call this var, and that is a select. It's a select with options. So var select. I do the same thing that Kelly does. Anytime I'm using a variable to target an actual element like a control or a DOM element or any kind of HTML element, if I'm going to be creating a jQuery selector from that, I use that $sign to just for personal preferences to note that that's what that is. So to use the client name, we can start with the hash for the ID, and then plus, and then just the client name, dot, and then the ID of the actual element. Oh, if I can type. That we want. So I'm going to create another one called var container equals. Oh, don't need to do that here. That's for the UL categories container. And I'm also going to create just a variable called checkboxes, and I'm just going to make it empty like that. So now, I'm going to reload my page and show you something. Remember that JavaScript is going to happen on the client. So if we actually look at how this is rendered on the client, we've got a select, and then we've got options. And we've got options with values, and then the text inside of those options, and so on. So just wanted to point that out real quick. Let's jump back in. So what I actually need to do is iterate through each one of those options and turn it into a checkbox, and then wrap that checkbox in an LI and drop that LI into this empty categories container. Pretty cool. So what I can actually do, now that I have actually cached that selector, I can say select children, and that finds the children. What kind of children? Option. And that's probably a little explicit, but that's okay. And I can use each function. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something for each one of these. And I'm going to go ahead and create a few more variables. We'll call this option, and that's for the actual select options. Val, text, text trim, and checkbox, and is parent. I'm going to use is parent to determine whether this is a parent or whether this is a child. And much like Kelly showed you, we can actually just pull with each one by saying this, or I'm sorry, here we go. Option equals this. So as this iterates through each one, it knows that this is the one that it's currently looping over, and we're assigning that to the variable option. And val equals option val. So now that we have option is this, then we can pull the value from that option using the option variable that I created. And now we've got text. The actual text or the label is, let's see, option text. And I want to make sure that I don't have any spaces to the left or to the right, so I can just add a trim function on the end of that, and you'll see why in just a moment. So now I'm going to say text trim equals. Now what I want to actually do here is remove the little hyphen. So we've removed the space to the left, and I can kind of show you what that would look like. So we've got a hyphen and then the category name, like so. So what I want to do is, if that hyphen exists, I want to first trim it to where it looks like this, and that's what we did on this line. And now we're going to do something that's pretty neat. We're going to use index of to actually remove that hyphen if it exists. So text trim equals, and this is actually neat, this is what's called a ternary operator. So we've got a condition, and if that condition is true, then we've got a result, or what we're going to do with that. If it's false, then we're going to do something else like so. So now within the condition, what is that condition? We can say, does the text have an index of a little hyphen? And where is the index? And that would be 0. So 0 is, remember in JavaScript, counts typically, they start with 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So if there is not a hyphen at the very first spot, then we can make a decision based on that. So the text trim is just going to be text. We don't need to do anything else with it. However, if this basically is a child, so we can say text and then use substring 1. Make sure my syntax is correct. Looks correct. I guess I'll find out in a moment. Now, is parent, we can kind of use the same logic here. We can say text index of, and then our little hyphen again. If the hyphen is not the very first thing, then it's a parent. Else, it's not a parent. Oops. So. Now we've taken care of that. Now the checkbox itself, we're actually going to create a checkbox all in JavaScript. So we can say the checkbox equals li class equals parent, and then I'm going to do a little dash because I'm going to actually hide or show things based on whether it's a parent or not. So I can actually do some concatenation here and incorporate my isParent variable. So if it is a parent, that class will say parent-true. If it's not, it'll say parent-false. So now for the actual checkbox, input type equals checkbox, value equals, and we'll do some more concatenation. It's the val. Plus, and this is kind of a neat thing here because we need to determine whether this checkbox is checked or not. So if this were an edit form, or even if we pass some hard-coded values in through a select command, then we could actually determine immediately whether this is checked or not. So based on the option, so we can use another ternary operator and say option is selected, and this is just a way to determine whether something is selected or not. So if it's selected, then we're going to pass in checked. If it's not, we'll just pass in nothing. And now we can close that part of our input, our checkbox. And now let's add our span for our label. I'll give this strong. You guys can see a little bit better. Plus, and I'm just going to pass in the trimmed text variable that I created. And I know this is confusing. It's confusing as I type it out, but it's really cool. All right. So there's my text box string. And let's see. So now what I can do, because I am iterating over these each one at a time, I can now say the checkboxes, which is this variable right here, and starts out blank, plus equals, which is a shorthand way of saying checkboxes equals checkboxes plus something else. Checkbox. And tell you what I'm going to do, because this is definitely confusing. I'm going to make sure I don't have any script errors on the page. All right, I don't. That's a good sign. Okay, so now after all the looping is done, we've gone through each of those. We can then create a jQuery object with the checkboxes and append them to the container. All right, so now you can see that we've literally created checkboxes, but we're not really organized just quite yet, and that's when things get a little bit more complex. So let's keep on going here. Okay, so notice this class here that I created. So I've got li class equals parent hyphen, and that's going to be true or false. So the parents are going to say true, and the children are going to say false. So what I can do here is say container, and now I'm talking about this container right here. So that's the variable that we created. So container, children, parent false, not, and I'll explain this in a second. Let's see, parent false, not parent false, plus parent false. Let's see, children parent false. Yes. Each function. Now what this is basically doing is looking for children within that container, those li elements, that have the class of parent false. Basically we want the kids, we want the children, but we want to make sure that it's not preceded by another parent false. That's what this is here. So we're looking for a child, but we're looking for the first one, and how we do that is by saying this is a child and it also is not preceded by a parent. And we're going to do something for each one of those. So that'll basically iterate through the very first child li within each grouping. All right, so now we can say this, and this is actually pretty cool. So this first child, and use next until, we're going to do something until parent is true. And me, don't forget me, so we're going to say this child until parent is true, and don't forget myself. We're going to wrap all, and we're going to wrap all of those in an li class equals children. And I can actually end this with a UL, and that will actually wrap this in the correct code. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. That looks right. Come on, Paige. There we go. So now you can actually see we've created a proper LI structure. So you've got an opening UL, you've got LI parent true, this one has children, and inside of that another unordered list with the different children. And we're actually at 2 minutes, so I really can do the rest of this on the next user group. But what we're actually going to be doing next is hiding these children and only showing them if a parent is selected or clicked on, and actually synchronizing this to where if we click parent A here is selected as well. And that's important because it's this list box right here that deals with the data binding. It doesn't really matter what's checked here. What matters is what's going on here. This is the control that's going to be sent to your submit command. So I'm going to stop there, guys, and if you have any questions, we've got just a couple minutes, and that's what I've got for now.
Thanks, Patrick. Feel free to open up your mics and ask any questions you may have of me or Patrick. It doesn't necessarily even have to be about what we presented today. If you have questions about XMod Pro in general or how you should cut your hair next time, we're open to give fashion advice, whatever you would like. So feel free to open up your mics and ask any questions you may have.
I'm wondering about the haircut thing.
I'll leave it to Hutch, yeah.
I love the style, Hutch, man. It works for you.
Is my part straight?
Low maintenance. So do you have icicles grow on that during the winter?
No, dude. I keep this covered up all winter.
You got any questions at all? Steven, you got something?
No, I got nothing in particular. Just saying it's great to see what's being presented, and just love being part of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I see that, Bill. I have to watch that 10 times to get it. Which one, Bill? I think they were both kind of complex.
Oh yeah. It's hard to really. You have to kind of sit down with the code and digest it, I think, because it's a complicated user interface.
You know, it's funny even with JavaScript and just one thing. One jot, tittle, apostrophe, something in the wrong spot, boom, done, broke.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually what's so good with that inspect element. It gives you that detail.
Absolutely.
I've used it heaps of times.
I like the little jQuery chaining you there at the end to wrap everything up in the parent or the categories parent class. I forgot what you called it exactly, but that was a nice little trick. A lot of chaining there.
Oh, the parent false plus parent false, or the self-wrapping?
The next until and self. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wrapping.
Yeah.
Very
But,
nice.
I was doing it wrong for quite some time. I was just creating an unordered list directly beneath it, but keeping correct with HTML standards, it really needs to be in another LI and a UL inside of that LI. So, yeah, it's pretty neat.
So now that we have everybody here, obviously if you have questions, feel free to pop up at any time. But if you are working on any project or have any either questions about your project or just want to kind of talk about your project, maybe how you're using XMod Pro, we'd love to hear from you. Now's a good time as any. The longer you wait, the older you'll get. Okay. guess that's it. I will have, Hutch, I'm going to have to think about it for a month. I'll get back to you on the hairstyle thing because I really want to do you up well there.
Yeah. Well, I'll be anxiously waiting for your suggestions.
All right. I think it'll involve a marker, but we'll see.
Well, as long as it doesn't involve a wig, I'll probably go for it.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining. If you have now, again, this isn't just about Patrick and I. We want it to be your group. It's a user group. So if you have some techniques, you want to show off something that you've been doing with XMod Pro, ways that you're leveraging it, or any other little tidbit that you might have found about XMod Pro, or how to do something cool in jQuery and integrate it with XMod Pro, whatever it happens to be, then just let us know beforehand. We'll get you on and let you present to everybody, and you will be world famous for it, at least within the XMod Pro community. So that's not too bad, really. It's my 15 minutes of fame. We can make it yours as well. But if you have any questions in the meantime, head us up on the website on DNNDev.com. Give us something on our support desk. Send comments. Be sure to like our videos if you do like them. And we will see you next month. That'll be May, the month of my birthday, so I'll probably be hungover all month. Just warning you. Until then, though, I really appreciated having you here, and we will see you next month.